Bob Scully's World Show is made possible in part by GDI, Commercial Cleaning Services, one provider, one solution. And by Clocks Technologies, biophotonic lighting manages skin from within.
Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, the Free Markets series. If you've been following the series at all, you know that once a year, perhaps the highest honor in this area is bestowed by the Atlas Network. It's the Templeton Award for Economic Freedom, and this year the winner heads the Foundation for Economic Freedom in Manila, the Philippines. His name is Calixto Chikiamco. Here he is. Calixto Chikiamco, I want to say, mabuhay.
Thank you.
Did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Well, welcome and congratulations on the Templeton Award.
Thank you.
And you're working on something extremely important, which I've always suspected will be eventually a revolution around the globe, which is property rights.
Correct.
And people watching us may think, well, you know, property rights, what could be more obvious? But in a country like the Philippines, it's not obvious.
That's right.
And it's very costly. So what does the Foundation for Economic Freedom do?
Well, it's a public advocacy organization. We advocate for market-oriented reforms and expanding economic freedom in the Philippines. We engage in policy battles, of course, adopting the free market point of view. So at the same time, we are also focusing on property rights because we believe in that having secured and well-defined property rights is a key to economic development.
And indeed, I think it's your colleague as an economist, Hernando de Soto in Peru, who worked on the city of Cairo as an example, as a test case, who demonstrated that if you don't have proper title to your house or the land that you are working as an agricultural worker, if you don't have that, you can't finance it, you can't sell it, you can't lend it, the whole thing just stops.
Sure.
And you fall into poverty.
Yes.
How come in all these countries it developed that way? Because to us it seems so odd that you wouldn't have property rights.
Well, perhaps there is in the case of the agriculture patent, there was a paternalistic view that the government knew better than what the farmer would know. So they put in a lot of restrictions on the title. There are, of course, sometimes administrative and legal reasons why a property is not titled. And that's one of the things that we worked on before this agriculture patent. We worked on residential patents. Before, in order to get a patent for a residential land, you'd have to go to court. And it would take you years to be able to get a title, and it's going to be expensive. So imagine if you're a poor farmer and you cannot afford the cost of even the publication.
Of course.
So what we did was we helped push a law that simplified the process and for an administrative issuance of a title rather than going to courts. So in that law, the government was mandated to issue the title within 90 days of application. So it helped a lot of people already and get the documentation for their land.
And of course, as in many social situations, an entrenched interest becomes a vested interest, and they fight back. They want to defend their privilege. So when they finally allowed, I was reading in the research, when they finally did allow patents, private patents on private land, then they put all kinds of little tricks in it to stretch it out and make it difficult.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Well, in the case of agricultural patents, the restrictions were that you could not borrow against it and you cannot sell it within the first 5 years that you got it. However, there was another restriction in which the owner was given an option to buy back the property within 5 years of selling it. That created huge consequences. That means That means he could not get access to credit because the banks wouldn't want to touch such kind of a title in which they could not sell it if it were foreclosed. They would have to wait for 5 years. So banks didn't want to touch it.
So it was like killing it, really.
Yeah, that's right. So that means the farmer had to go to the underground, very expensive usurious market to be able to obtain a loan. At the same time, nobody would want to buy it and to develop it, because what if you developed it, then after 5 years, the original owner comes back to you and buys it. In fact, one of our supporters for that bill was the solar industry, you could imagine. Why is that? Because solar farms need lots of land. You need 1 hectare for 1 megawatt of power. So if you imagine if you're in the countryside and you want to consolidate land, for let's say 100 megawatts,
to do a park.
And there are actually agricultural patents on the land. What if you buy them and you develop the solar farm, then they go out and buy you back within 5 years. So
and you're forced to sell at the price you
that's right.
paid.
So that is why the removal of the restrictions really liberated the market. And the solar developers were quite happy with this development. We didn't
Of course.
imagine them as one of the original supporters. We thought it was only going to be the banks. But it turned out that even the solar developers are having difficulty.
And did in the give and take of this negotiation, the ones who had put in the restriction and so on, they didn't just abolish it because you wanted it abolished. You had to fight for your rights. How big a fight was it? What kind of fight?
Well, in this particular case, not that much because we work silently to get it done. So the potential oppositors, especially the leftists, did not have a clue what was going on.
Because they wanted to nationalize, probably.
Oh yeah. In fact, the Philippines has 2 kinds of rural land. One is these agricultural patents. This is where the government, from its own land, gives it to the farmer. Then there's what they call our land reform. That means it's already private land, but the government forces the landlord to sell it to the peasant. And these are what you call, land reform properties.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that first, it took them 30 years. So, there's an uncertainty about, why would you buy a land and the government will force you to sell it to the peasant? So it created uncertainty in the rural land market, and so nobody wanted to invest anymore in rural land because of that uncertainty. And secondly, then the government put in a restriction that you cannot borrow against it and sell it within the first 10 years. So again,
it's getting to be a little bit...
So what happened in our land reform was that it caused what we call the redistribution of poverty. In other words, it did not create prosperity, it did not increase productivity. So we still have that problem, that portion of land that was land reformed, because again, those type of titles still have those restrictions. And we are hoping that we could also push for a reform measure that will address this problem. But of course, in this particular case, especially the leftists and even the bureaucrats are against reforming the system, because whenever there are restrictions, there's a reason for them to be able to ask for a bribe.
Indeed, and that's probably how they make their living.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, it's really pure rent seeking.
And when you say it's still like that, does that mean that you have to go plot of land by plot of land with a court order of some kind and start over each time? To get a patent on it, or to get the patent lifted? No,
these are, I said, these are there's a difference. The patents, agricultural patents, those were given from government land, public land, and given to the farmer. The others are already private land. There were landlords So the government forcibly took it away from you and gave it to the peasant. And that is, they created a quasi-title, they call that Certificate of Land Ownership Awards. But those had restrictions. As I said, they could not borrow against it, they could not sell it. And you cannot own more than 5 hectares of land. That's in the law.
Which isn't much.
Which isn't much. It leads to fractionalization of land. In fact, right now, because of death of the farm, the heirs would subdivide it. And the average size of farmland in the Philippines is only 1 hectare. Too small for economies of scale.
Yeah, of course.
And again, this is a violation of our idols, Ronald Coase of the University of Chicago, is that it does not allow efficient farmers to buy out inefficient ones.
Yeah, of course.
Because
which should normally happen.
You're only limited to 5 hectares. No matter how successful you are, you cannot buy out your neighbor, assuming that neighbor is not productive.
But that must be pretty discouraging. All these hurdles and these difficulties that they put in the way. You need courageous farmers to get to the bottom of this.
Sure, but that's the reason why agricultural productivity in the Philippines is the lowest in the ASEAN region, and our food production is even lower than our population growth. So it's such a huge problem for the Philippines. And that is the reason also why poverty in the Philippines is still quite high.
Yeah.
It's still about 25% of the population. And most of them are in the rural areas. Again, because there's a lack of agricultural productivity because of all of these policies.
And we've had on the show people from the freedom movement, people like Tom Palmer, who was actually at the award ceremony last night where you won your prize, who risked their lives and who worked with other people risking their lives to disseminate ideas, books, or changes in laws and so on. That's why I was asking earlier about a fight. The Philippines, we think of it as a country boiling under the surface. You know, there's religious and ethnic conflicts and so on. Were you embroiled in all that? Were you targeted in all that?
Of course, we would always be criticized, especially by the Marxists in the Philippines. They'd always be said that we are tools of we are foreign agents of foreign power. That's the usual criticism when you advocate market-oriented reforms.
Sure. You're stuck between an enviable choice between Islamic militants and Marxist militants.
That's true.
It's probably not much fun.
It's true, but recently we had at least a historic peace agreement with the Muslim rebel group that calls for the creation.
On Mindanao?
Yes, in Mindanao, for creation of an autonomous government. Now, the Foundation for Economic Freedom was asked by the incoming Muslim autonomous government to provide them advice. So we're hoping that we're telling them, you could be another Hong Kong, another Singapore, because you have autonomy. You could pass your own laws.
Yeah.
So
what do they say? What do they say?
They're very open because they want to rebuild their, war-torn region. It's one of the poorest regions in the Philippines, especially because of conflict, etc.
And the Philippines in the ASEAN family is already the poorest economy, if I'm not mistaken.
Not really. Well, of course, Cambodia and Laos, those are,
Yeah.
But
I was talking about the big 6 there.
Yeah. Well, it is. But right now, the Philippines has sort of made a turnaround. It's growing at around 6% per year. It's helped by the fact that it has a young population. The average age in the Philippines is only about 23, 24 years old. Compared with, Thailand, for example, their working age population is shrinking. So they have a huge problem.
Like China itself.
Yeah, China itself, I think about 3 years ago, their working age population is started to shrink. and they're going to have a huge problem down the road.
And there was a poll, a regional poll that was done. I was looking, sort of digging deeper a little bit, and they found a constant, which is in each of those 6 countries, but worst of all in the Philippines. The young people say, yes, I want to find work, I want to do this, I want to do that, but not here, not in my country. I want to go to the other country.
Sure.
That too is discouraging. It means, you know, people are not, it's not a vote of confidence.
Yes, because again, it's the investment climate in the Philippines quite discouraging. So if there are lack of investors, lack of jobs.
Yes.
So young people want to go abroad and work, you know. So it's a irony, you know, all this, especially the protectionists, you know, they say, oh, this is the way to build our country, is to shut off, you know, foreign goods, etc.
Mercantilist.
Yeah, so what happens, an example here is sugar is highly protected. So the food manufacturers in the Philippines pay twice as much for sugar than the rest of the world. In other words, local sugar prices are twice the world market price of sugar. So what happens, we end up importing goods with sugar in it, right?
And that you produce
cookies
anyway.
or chocolates and all of that. So that's the irony of it, no?
Yeah, indeed. And also, since we're in the realm of ideas, what De Soto and others and yourself, when you say that there should be property rights, it means title to a building or to land, which gives it value and can be traded and so on.
That's right.
And that sort of argues right away for monetary reform, a currency that is stable and that is properly backed, either adopting another country's currency or a gold standard or another standard. It seems to me the Foundation for Economic Freedom will eventually want to do that. I'm just guessing. But you'll want that as part of the mix. You'll need a stable currency.
Well, right now, inflation in the Philippines is not a problem. In a way, the problem is man-made. It's because of restrictions. Inflation in the Philippines before was high. The reason being is that the government had a monopoly on rice importation. So our rice prices were quite high, maybe 40% higher than the world market price.
Really?
So what happens with this high rice prices, therefore high inflation, then you have workers who are, you know, will be restive because their food costs are quite high. So fortunately, this year, well, the foundation helped in part of that campaign is that now the government abolished the rice importation monopoly and let the private sector import rice. There was a dramatic decline in inflation. And the biggest beneficiary was the poor, because the poor was the ones who suffer most from high prices.
Overpaying,
yeah. So in that sense, it's not too much of a problem at this point. So the key really is free trade and open markets.
Which is what you're aiming for.
Yes, that's what we're aiming for. Of course, there are those vested interests who are opposing you. You know, the sugar planters are opposing you. They're saying, you know, we cannot compete with the rest of the world.
But at least what they do is public, because these are world prices, these are commodities, so at least they can't escape scrutiny. But I was just going to ask, how do you there are many types of corruption in the developing world, of course. There's the corruption of civil servants, sometimes a regime, an autocratic regime, sometimes it's just banditry, it's just outlaws out there and on the streets. What form does corruption take in the Philippines?
Oh, many ways of course, leakages of government funds. That's quite pervasive. You know, so...
Do they are they upset with you and trying to push you into a marginal role?
Not really, because again, our approach is to provide a you know, market-based solution. You know, and so far we have had no.
They can't be against it.
Yeah. At the same time, it's a good thing that a number of our fellows are actually ex-government officials, sometimes ex-cabinet secretaries. So that lends prestige to our organization, and so the government or even the others would really hesitate before criticizing our approach.
Yeah. And how do you get the message out when you're a think tank and you're fighting for ideas? You might have the right ideas, but the population doesn't have a clue that you're out there fighting for that. You have to do some proselytizing, some preaching. How do you do it?
Well, we engage them on if there are issues that we think we have to take a stand, we issue press releases, use social media, interact with decision makers, build a coalition, and then present our demands to a particular government official.
Okay.
So that's how we do it.
And nobody stops you. Can you go into the schools and talk to students?
Oh yeah,
Nobody.
Well, the Philippines is now still a formal democracy, so there'll be no problem. I know that the image that of there's authoritarianism, but this is right now on paper it's still democratic, and we are free to criticize the president or whoever the high government officials. I personally have criticized some of the president's policies, especially the populist. Populism is all over the world. It's gaining ground.
Has he called you? Because they say he picks up the phone and calls people, the president.
Well, in my case, so far, no. I've been in previous administrations. I've been asked to serve. If you're so good, why don't you serve?
And what was your answer?
My answer is no, thank you. I don't have a stomach for being, because I also have a business. I'm an entrepreneur. So
what does your business do?
Well, I have two businesses. One is it's quite unique. It's what they call a business processing company, or a BPO. We provide karaoke to Japan.
Ah,
yeah,
that's interesting.
So our client there is the second biggest karaoke company in Japan.
Really?
So I have 50 musicians in the office.
Really?
Yes.
So it's a lively office.
A lively office.
Nobody falls asleep on the job.
Yep, of course, yeah.
And what does the other company do?
The other company is an internet company. It's a cloud-based software as a service company. It's a B2B, not a B2C company.
And therefore, your heart must have sunk a little bit when the president announced that he wanted to move away from the U.S. and closer to China. That's not exactly the road to free enterprise. I don't know if it's still the case.
Well, I think he didn't mean that in terms of economic approach or ideology. It's more of a geopolitical play. I think he wanted to
Big Bay and all that.
balance the two superpowers. Because China is in a way an economic superpower already.
Sure.
So he wanted to get the best of both. Governments. But actually, although the president says that he wants to move away from the U.S., militarily we're still very much aligned with the United States.
Well, Calixto, I look forward to going down there to practice karaoke.
Oh, yeah.
With your 50
musicians.
Colleagues, as long as you promise not to play it. Just let me do it in the basement over there.
Okay.
It'll be a lot of fun.
Yep.
But long life to you and to the Foundation for Economic Freedom.
Thank you.
Mabuhay.
Mabuhay.
That's it, eh? Okay.
All right.
Long life.
Thank you.
Calixto Chikiamco. And now here's someone else coming up on the World Show.
Although our name is the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we think of ourselves as investors. Investors, and this is the culture we're developing here and that we've set out to build, which is looking for good investment opportunities. Of course, we're not in the business of competing with private sector investors. We don't want to displace them. We want to invite them in. And so we know that our role is going to be to invest in a different way, in a way that drives the public interest and delivers services to Canadians and therefore we have to find our place and our role. But because it's a new formula to build new infrastructure, if you put those two elements together with the investor mindset, then I think the entrepreneurialism just comes naturally. One project I can speak about, which we've made an announcement on, is the new regional transit system in Montreal called the Réseau Express Métropolitain. It's a 67-kilometer, 26 surface train, 26 stations, autonomous, electrified. It is a next generation system. And I think that, and it is under construction as we speak. And I think as it comes online over the next few years, people will have a dramatically different experience than what they have today. And we expect that will be one step towards a better tomorrow from an urban transit perspective.
Calixto Chikiamco, winner of this year's Templeton Award, was our special guest this week on the Free Market series of the World Show. I'm Bob Scully. Have a great week. Thanks.
Bob Scully's World Show was made possible in part by GDI, Commercial Cleaning Services, one provider, one solution. And by Clocks Technologies, Biophotonic Lighting, manages skin from within.